Early voting begins today for the March 20th primary elections, and voter registration in Cook County has generally not been strong. How does that bode for the November general election? Also, the recently proposed sit down and shut up ordinance in the Chicago City Council has been making some people stand up and shake their heads. One of those people is Cook County Clerk David Orr, and he's here to talk about all that and much more. David Orr, welcome back to Chicago tonight.
Thanks. Good to see you.
First of all, good to see you too, sir. Early voting for the primaries began today. What are your expectations?
Well, I think it'll continue to grow dramatically by the fall. Already today we had more than we had at the same time 2 years ago, considerably more in the same time, even more than the primary in '08. And the primary in Illinois, the presidential with Obama as a candidate, was very dynamic, but we beat those numbers today.
And do you have a sense of where these votes are coming from?
Well, it's clear. For example, Northbrook and Arlington Heights were two of the hottest sites. So usually you can tell where there's really strongly contested races. There's certain places that always vote high, like Orland Park, but others vary according to whether or not there's a real good primary.
Now, you have to keep an eye on that because depending on the level of interest in a particular race, you have to gear up for that. Where else are you expecting to see a lot of action?
Well, it's hard to generalize, Phil, because a lot of the races are, for example, the congressional races. If there's a strong Republican or Democratic primary, that would include South and Jesse Jackson's area. It could include some of the new ones up
the
north,
race between
northwest.
Jesse Jackson and Halverson.
That's right, down there. Then you have some contested state rep and state senate races. So you got a few of those, but they're scattered all over the county. The only big county-wide race is the one for circuit court clerk race between Rick Munoz and Dorothy Brown. So that's a little hard to target. So we just keep track every day, and where we think it's growing, we want to make sure we have enough machines and enough people there to control the crowds.
Well, we've been talking about early voting. What are you seeing in terms of voter registration itself? Voter
registration is up in suburban Cook. It's down slightly in Chicago. I don't think we should play that up too much. Chicago's population's down a little bit. They're keeping their list cleaner, I think, than they used to, so I think that's good.
What do you mean by that?
Well, in other words, if you go back when, let's say, when I first ran for alderman way back in 1979, the lists in Chicago were pretty dreadful, meaning there could just be an awful lot of people that were no longer, they were still on the list, but they were no longer there. There's always a certain number that are going to be
or
there.
In many cases, with us.
With us, or yes, in the cemetery someplace. But I think they've gotten a lot better. So ours is up in suburban Cook, but it'll be much higher come November because unfortunately this primary is not attracting as much interest as the general election will.
Illinois' history regarding primaries and turnout is not a particularly bright one. Why not?
I think a lot of people just don't like to, quote, declare a party. It's a kind of a philosophical debate. What that means is, in the old ways, you walk into polling places. Let's say you're a Democrat in DuPage County, or you're a Republican in Cook County, and you not always feel comfortable. You walk in there and the judge yells out, "You want a Republican or Democratic ballot?" Sometimes people feel nervous. Sometimes there's a lot of people don't identify with the parties as much. So it's just generally a low turnout, with exceptions when Obama ran in 2008 and when Clinton ran way back in 1992. But on the other hand, the other argument simply is that parties, the ones who are more interested in the parties, the Democrat or Republican, et cetera, should have the right to pick their candidates for the general election.
Do you see a realistic possibility that could ever change that system?
Well, there's been attempts to change it. The difficulty is every time you try and change something, there's consequences you hope will not mess things up. You don't want to have a situation where you might have a whole bunch of people that are, let's say, Republicans, but they're going to vote and therefore affect who the Democrats pick. Or right now, there could be thousands of Democrats that would not vote in the Democratic primary to try and determine which Republican candidate they thought would be easier for Obama to defeat. So some states that have a little different process do have some difficulties with that.
All right, let's switch gears. As you know, there's this ordinance was proposed, has been given the nickname of sit down and shut up. It would have sought to control the outbursts in city council chambers from onlookers, and you've been pretty outspoken about it. What was your reaction to that proposal?
Well, again, I think in this day and age, we should always try and give as much leeway to the public. They're not heard enough. That's why they're angry. They're not heard. I mean, the world and this country, we see this incredible difference now between those who have and those don't. We need to address those grievances, and you want to be careful. You don't want people being obnoxious, but we have ways to deal with that. If I could handle 40,000 people in the street back in 1987, I think we can handle some people who maybe shout out something now and then. So it's not that we want to condone uncivil behavior. We just don't want to pass things that can be misused. Most of the time when it's raucous in the city council, it's because in this case the old mayors would send down all the people to support their causes and shut up people like me.
Well, evidently that ordinance, even though it's proposed, is pretty much acknowledged to be dead in the water. But you found it pretty offensive to begin with. Well,
yeah, let's face it. No one wants to see people interrupting things, and I hope they're not worried about Occupy Chicago, Occupy Wall Street, because again, we want people to behave. At the same time, we don't want to put things in the way of making it more difficult for people to be heard. People need to be heard. We got a lot of problems in this country, and I think the little guys get in the shaft half the time, and let's hear what they have to say. So
it sounds like you're anticipating what might be happening with the NATO and G8 summits.
Yeah, almost everything today. Part of the reason I think we worry about voters, are they going to turn out, is because they don't feel like many of us in elective office are doing enough to help them. And I do worry about the same thing with the summit, that I want the summit not to be a big debate over what this protester did or this policeman did, but about the serious issues. Why is there so much inequity between so many Americans and the few who have so much? Those are real issues. They should be debated. Why are people upset about the G8 and NATO and so forth? What could be done that's different? I don't want to see just, I saw the news tonight, it was all about, riot gear and helmets and protests, and I think they're trying to scare the living daylights out of us, which I'm not looking forward to. I think we want to, people are going to come, they can protest, we can handle it.
As a former mayor, how long were you mayor? 3 years?
7 days.
7 days you were mayor. As a former mayor of Chicago yourself, your assessment of the current mayor?
I've given Rahm Emanuel some pretty good comments and pretty good review in a number of cases. I think he's really tried to clean up a number of things, including trying to get rid of some of the deadweight city council. I mean, at least in some of the bureaucracies, he's cut in areas which I think are important. Others I wouldn't agree with. He's tried to reform the TIF process, which is very important. That's $500 million every year of tax money that most of the public do not understand what it goes for. I think that's pretty good. I worry a little bit. I would hope that he could do a better job of negotiating with the teachers and some of the other union people. Teachers are great people, and they do a good job by and large with a difficult population. It's not easy to be a teacher in Chicago. So I think there's way too much fighting and games and trying to battle each other, one-upsmanship. We need people to work together. So I hope that they can shout a little less and work together. But there's a number of things that I'm impressed with his organization. Other things I don't know enough about to be too critical. But I'm a pretty critical guy, so let's hope that I can keep saying good things about him. Well,
speaking of your criticism, you brought in a copy of a newspaper article. May I see that, please? And it relates to one of your former aldermanic colleagues who was recently indicted. He's now Cook County Commissioner William Bevers, of course. And your reaction to his indictment?
Well, I don't like to see anybody indicted, and assuming if in fact he would be found guilty of this, my reaction is mostly concerned about the taxpayers, Chicago.
Along those lines, your reaction to the allegation that he took like $68,000 of campaign money, put it into his pension fund as an alderman, and was therefore able to more than double it.
Yeah, I don't understand that law. It must have been passed after me. I didn't find out in time for the show tonight of where that came from. It was after I left the city council. It doesn't make sense to me. None of it makes sense. The problem is less with Bevers. Bevers, if in fact he's guilty of these things, he will end up going to jail. It's this ongoing corruption, which was so prevalent in the city, and it's done so much damage. It's not just a corruption tax. It's people are afraid now to trust government to do things to help people. And we need that. There's so many people in need, the seniors, the students. There's so many things that we could do, but it's hard sometimes to do these things because people are so fed up with, particularly in Chicago, the misuse over the last many years of people being corrupt and misusing our tax dollars.
David Orr, thank you so much for coming by. We appreciate it.
You bet, Phil.
And you can visit our website to learn more about the proposed sit-down and shut-up ordinance. There you'll find our interview with 33rd Ward Alderman Dick Mell, who now calls the ordinance pretty much dead on arrival. There's also an extended interview with David Orr. Just go to WTTW.com/Chicago Tonight.